All right, so welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be looking at Hindu philosophy and Buddhism,
Good.
specifically what these traditions have to say about the self and the nature of reality.
Big questions.
Big, big questions. And to tackle those big questions, we've got some
Yeah.
really cool source material. It's actually audio lectures,
Oh,
so
nice.
we'll be hearing it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Sounds good.
Yeah, some really insightful, sometimes even pretty funny stuff.
I always appreciate a little humor mixed in.
Me too, absolutely.
No.
So let's just dive right in. Okay, so this Hindu concept
Okay.
of the world as self, that already has me intrigued. There's this phrase,
Yep.
Tatvam Asi, which means that art thou. And it suggests that the self is like the basis of everything. Like we come from the world, not into it.
It's a profound idea, when you think about it.
It's a very different way of looking at things.
It is.
It
It
is.
is. The lecturer compares it to like a leaf coming from a tree. That's the relationship they're describing. We're not separate entities entering the world, but rather expressions of it.
So we're not, I guess, coming in and trying to learn about it. We are it, and we're like emanating.
Right, exactly. Emanating from it. We're already part of the whole.
Wow. Okay. So how did the ancient Hindus even arrive at such a concept? Like,
Well, he connects it to the evolution of human cultures.
yeah.
So you've got these
Sure.
early hunter-gatherer societies, very reliant on shamanistic practices.
Okay.
But eventually we transitioned to agrarian societies,
Yeah.
more settled, and then they had established priesthoods.
So as humans settled down and started farming, their understanding of the self also kind of shifted?
Exactly, exactly.
Right.
And with that shift, you have the emergence of cities, specialized labor, and this is where you see the four castes in Hindu society developing.
Right, right. The Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and the Sudra. And I always thought about those as being like social hierarchy, but it sounds like it's more nuanced than that.
It is. It is. He's saying it reflects different aspects of the self in relation to the world, different roles we play.
Okay. I'm starting to see that, like the Brahmana, the priests and scholars, the Kshatriya, the warriors and rulers. It's all
Oh, yeah.
connected.
And it's fascinating how he ties this back to the very beginnings of agrarian settlements. Many of them actually centered around vineyards.
Oh, interesting.
He even mentions the biblical story of Noah. After the flood, what's the first thing Noah does? He plants a vineyard.
Wow, I never thought about that.
So you see this deep connection between settled life, cultivation, and this idea of the self in relation to the world.
And then on top of that, there's this whole concept of the four stages of life in Hinduism. The brahmacharya, grihasta, vanaprastha, and sannyasa.
Yes, the cyclical journey.
Is that also tied to this idea of the self?
Absolutely, absolutely. Each stage represents a different phase of development and self-discovery.
Okay, so you start as a student, brahmacharya, then you become a householder, grihasta, fulfilling your duties
Right.
to family and society. But then things get interesting. You leave everything behind and head to the forest.
Right, the Vanaprastha stage.
Yeah.
This is where the inward journey begins, seeking wisdom, deeper understanding of the self.
But wouldn't that be dangerous, though? Like just wandering off into the woods with no one to guide you?
Well, that's where the guru comes in. The importance of having a spiritual guide during this vulnerable stage. And actually,
Ouch.
he tells this hilarious story about a man who mistook an insurance salesman for a guru. Just goes to show,
Oh, wow. That's great. That's funny.
you never know where enlightenment might come from.
You really don't. Okay, so all of these stages, including the final one, sannyasa, complete renunciation, are about realizing that the self is not limited to
Yes,
our individual ego.
exactly. It's something much vaster. It encompasses everything we perceive as other. That's Advaita, the concept of non-duality.
So it's like saying, I'm the world and the world is me.
That's it. You got it.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But how do you actually experience that? What tools or practices do Hindus use to kind of achieve this realization?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Hinduism really emphasizes sadhana, spiritual discipline, and yoga, which is
Yeah.
often misunderstood in the West.
Yeah, most people just think of like stretching and poses.
Right, but the true meaning of yoga is union. The union of the individual self, Jivatman, with the supreme self, Atman or Brahman.
Okay, so how do you achieve that union?
That's the paradox. There is no method to arrive at a place you already are.
Wait, what?
He uses this great Zen story about a monk meditating to become a Buddha. Meanwhile, his master is polishing a brick, trying to make it a mirror.
What does that even, how does that even?
It's pointing to the futility of striving for enlightenment. The desire for a method often comes from fear
Okay.
and a need to postpone realizing the self. We already are what we're seeking.
So you're saying all those practices like pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi are useless?
Not necessarily. These practices can be beneficial, but they can also become traps if you approach them with the wrong motivation.
Okay.
Like if it's coming from a place of fear or a desire to boost your ego,
Uh-huh.
that can lead you further from self-realization.
It's almost like you can't run from your own shadow, right?
Exactly, exactly. The key is, and he uses this term, coming off it, like dropping the act,
Okay.
the pretense of a separate self. He uses this great analogy of a diving lesson.
Yeah, okay.
The student meticulously prepares to dive, but ultimately needs a push to finally take the plunge.
No, it's about letting go of control and trusting the process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And realizing that even spiritual pride, the constant search for a higher stage, can be forms of ego clinging.
Oh, okay.
Like Achilles and the tortoise, all the calculations delay the inevitable overtaking. The more we overthink and strive, the further we get.
Got it, got it. So in Hindu philosophy, it's all about realizing the self as the basis of everything and letting go of that illusion of separateness.
Beautifully put, yeah.
Okay, I think I got that. So now, how about we explore how Buddhism tackles these questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
World as emptiness.
Yeah.
What does that even look like?
Well, he describes Buddhism as Hinduism stripped for export.
Okay.
It really focuses on that core experience of awakening. And, it's important to remember that Buddha isn't a name, it's a title.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
The awakened one.
So you don't have to be Siddhartha Gautama.
You don't have to be Siddhartha to be a Buddha. It's about achieving a particular state of awareness.
Gotcha, gotcha.
And speaking of Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha,
Yeah.
his journey is a great example of this. He started out as an ascetic,
Okay.
denying himself all pleasures, but eventually realized that trying to force unselfishness, it wasn't the answer.
So what did he discover? Like, what was the...
Well, his core teaching is the Dharma,
Okay.
which is essentially a method based on the Four Noble Truths.
Okay, the Four Noble Truths, yeah.
The first truth is dukkha, which means suffering or frustration is inherent to life.
Okay, so life isn't always sunshine and rainbows?
No, it's not.
What's the second truth?
The second is that the cause of this dukkha is trishna,
Krishna.
which means craving, clinging. We suffer because we're constantly attached to things that are impermanent.
And the third truth is that there's a way out.
There is a way out. The cessation of dukkha is nirvana.
Nirvana. Yeah.
Literally means blowout or letting go.
So if we can let go of our cravings, we can be free from suffering.
That's the idea.
That makes sense, but it also seems so hard.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Which is why we have the fourth truth. It lays out a path
Okay.
for achieving nirvana, the Eightfold Path.
So there is a method after all.
Well, yes, but it's not like a set of rules or rituals. It's about cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline.
Okay. I'm sensing some similarities here with the Hindu concept of yoga.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the lecture points out two really key Buddhist teachings that underpin everything else.
Yeah.
Anicca, which means impermanence, and anatman, which means no self.
No self. So Buddhism is saying there's no such thing as a self.
Well, not exactly. It's more about recognizing that there's no permanent, unchanging self.
Okay.
We're constantly changing just like everything else in the universe. Like a whirlpool.
Oh, okay.
It has a distinct form, but the water flowing through it is constantly changing.
Okay, that makes sense. So if there's no fixed self, what's the point of, I guess, following any ethical guidelines or pursuing enlightenment at all?
Well, even though Buddhism acknowledges this impermanence of the self, it still emphasizes skillful means, or upaya, to achieve liberation.
Okay.
For example, the 5 precepts, or Pankasila. They're not commandments, but rather vows you undertake for their practical benefit.
What are those 5 precepts?
So, abstaining from harming living beings, abstaining from taking what is not given, abstaining from sexual misconduct, which is interpreted as exploiting passion, abstaining from false speech, and abstaining from intoxicants.
Okay, those seem like pretty solid guidelines for living a harmonious life, whether you're Buddhist or not.
Absolutely. And those precepts are a key part of the Eightfold Path, which has these 3 main divisions.
Yeah.
Understanding conduct and meditation.
So what about the right in the Eightfold Path? Is that about, like, following some kind of moral code?
Not necessarily.
What?
Right is a poor translation. The word is samyak, which means complete, total or middle way.
So it's about finding a balanced approach to life, not about rigid rules.
Exactly, exactly. And the two concluding steps of the path are particularly interesting. Samyak Smriti, or right mindfulness,
Okay.
and Samyak Samadhi, or right concentration.
What are those?
So Smriti, as the lecturer explains it, is about cultivating complete presence of mind, like in the house that Jack built, meditation. Seeing the limitations of our ordinary scattered consciousness and just becoming fully present. Samadhi, on the other hand, is a state of complete mental absorption, the gateway to nirvana where that illusion of a separate ego dissolves.
So it's like that feeling of being completely absorbed in an activity.
Yes.
Like a skilled horse rider becoming one with the horse.
Exactly. But here's the thing. While Buddhism talks about these states of awakening, it really steers clear of making any grand metaphysical claims about ultimate reality.
So no pronouncements about the nature of God or
Not really.
the afterlife?
The Buddha was famous for refusing to answer metaphysical questions, maintaining what's called noble silence.
So how do Buddhists describe that reality then?
Well, this is where the concept of emptiness, or sunyata, comes in.
Emptiness. That sounds a bit, well, empty.
It can be a confusing term, especially for us Westerners. But sunyata isn't about nihilism. It's about recognizing that reality transcends all concepts. Like that famous line from the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form.
So it's not about saying that nothing exists, but rather seeing the limitations of our own conceptual frameworks.
Exactly, exactly. It's recognizing the impermanence of everything, including our own ideas about reality.
Okay, so emptiness is more like a state of potentiality, not a blank slate.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this concept was really developed by Nagarjuna, Buddhist philosopher, who founded the Madhyamaka school, which translates to middle way or emptiness school.
And what was his approach?
He used a dialectical method, kind of like those modern-day tea groups or blab labs, where the teacher challenges the student's assumptions without offering any alternatives. This forces the student to confront the void and experience liberation.
So it's about dismantling our preconceived notions to make space for a more direct experience of reality.
You got it.
That's a lot to unpack. But I'm starting to get a sense of how radical and liberating this idea of emptiness can be.
It definitely challenges our conventional way of thinking.
And speaking of challenges, I'm curious how Buddhism views death. In Hinduism, it seemed to be a natural part of the cyclical journey of life.
It is. It is. Buddhism also views death as a natural part of life, and even a potential opportunity for liberation.
Liberation from what?
Liberation from suffering, from this cycle of birth and death, from the illusion of a separate self. Remember the 5 precepts? First one, abstaining from harming living beings. Well, death is simply a transition, not an ending. And if you approach it with acceptance and understanding, it can be a powerful catalyst for spiritual growth.
So it's not something to be feared?
Not necessarily. But it is something to be mindful of, to contemplate, to integrate into our understanding of life.
This is definitely a different perspective from what you usually hear in the West.
It is.
We tend to avoid talking about it or treat it as something morbid and terrifying.
But in Buddhism, accepting impermanence, including our own mortality, it's seen as key to truly embracing life.
Living fully in the present moment, knowing that everything's constantly changing. I gotta admit, this whole concept of the void still feels pretty abstract to me. It's hard to wrap my mind around something that's beyond concepts.
It is a challenging concept. But remember, the void is not blank nothingness. It's more like this vast open space that contains infinite possibilities.
So it's not about emptying our minds, but rather recognizing the boundless nature of
awareness. Think about space itself. No boundaries, no limits. And yet, it contains everything: stars, planets, galaxies. In a similar way, our true nature is this limitless space of awareness.
It's a beautiful way to put it. Reminds me of that Zen saying, you can't nail a peg into the sky.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how Chinese Buddhism embraced this idea of the void, but also adapted it to their own cultural context.
They allowed monks to marry
and
emphasized the possibility of enlightenment for lay people.
Exactly. And that story of the layman Vimalakirti winning a debate about the void by remaining silent. Just a classic example of this pragmatic approach, not about intellectual gymnastics, but a direct experience of reality.
It makes you wonder, if our true nature is this boundless void, then what is it that's clinging? What's the source of this resistance to change and this fear of death?
That is the question.
Big questions.
That lies at the heart of both Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. And it's something we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into these traditions.
All right, so join us for part 2 of our deep dive.
Absolutely.
Into Hindu philosophy and Buddhism. We'll be right back after a short break.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've been talking about how both Hinduism and Buddhism really emphasize this impermanence of the self.
Right.
But if the self is always changing, does that mean we're not responsible for our actions?
That's a question that has puzzled philosophers and spiritual seekers for ages, yeah.
Yeah, because if there's no fixed self, how can we be held accountable for anything?
If I am not a fixed entity, did I really do anything at all?
It's a real head-scratcher.
It is.
But both of these traditions offer an interesting perspective on this through the concept of karma. Yeah, karma. Isn't that about some kind of cosmic reward and punishment system? Like if you do good things, you get good karma. If you do bad things, you get bad karma.
Not quite. It's not about some cosmic judge keeping score, no. Karma in these traditions is more about cause and effect.
Okay.
Every action, every thought, every intention creates ripples that influence our lives and the lives of those around us.
Okay, so less about punishment, more about consequences.
Right.
But if there's no unchanging I at the center of it all, do my actions really matter?
They do, because even though the self is impermanent, the actions arising from this flow of being still have an impact. Think back to that whirlpool analogy.
Okay, yeah.
The water flowing through it is constantly changing, but the whirlpool itself creates a distinct pattern of movement.
Okay.
So in a similar way, our actions, even arising from this kind of impermanent self, they create a unique imprint on the world.
I see. So even though the water molecules in the whirlpool are always changing, the whirlpool as a whole still exists and affects its surroundings.
You got it.
And this is actually pretty liberating when you think about it, because it means we're not trapped by this idea of a fixed self that's inherently good or bad.
Right.
Instead, we can just focus on acting skillfully, in ways that create positive ripples and contribute to the well-being of ourselves and others.
Beautiful memes.
Yeah. So in a way, understanding impermanence actually empowers us to take responsibility for our actions.
Absolutely.
Knowing that they have real consequences.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's a different way of looking at it, for sure.
It is. Now, how do you think this idea of emptiness, of letting go of clinging, applies to our everyday lives?
Well, it makes me think about all the things I cling to. My possessions, my relationships, my ideas about who I am. And, the more I cling, the more I suffer when things inevitably change.
Exactly. And Buddhism would suggest that recognizing the impermanent nature of everything can help us loosen our grip and find greater peace.
It reminds me of that saying, if you love something, let it go.
Yeah.
If it comes back to you, it's yours forever. If it doesn't, it was never meant to be.
It's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
Of course, letting go doesn't mean becoming passive.
Right.
Or indifferent.
Yeah.
We can still act passionately and engage with the world.
Yeah.
But it's about recognizing that clinging to things ultimately leads to suffering.
It's about the clinging.
It is. Now, this is making me think about how the lecturer talked about accepting death.
Yeah.
He even suggests that we could celebrate death as a liberation.
Right. That's pretty radical.
It is a radical idea, especially in Western culture.
Yeah, where we try to avoid even thinking about it.
Exactly. But in Buddhism, accepting death is seen as crucial to truly embracing life. Remember that kamikaze pilot who felt that sense of godlike power when facing his own mortality?
Yes, and he had let go of everything.
He had.
Yeah, that line, I pray that death will not come and find me still unannihilated. It's powerful stuff.
It is. It's like by accepting death,
yeah,
we become fully alive.
In the present moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this connects back to that Buddhist emphasis on mindfulness.
Okay.
Being fully present with whatever arises.
Yeah.
Without judgment or resistance.
Okay. I gotta be honest. This whole concept of the void still feels pretty abstract to me.
Yeah.
It's hard to wrap my mind around something that's beyond concepts.
I get it. But remember, the void is not blank nothingness.
Right.
It's more like this vast open space that contains infinite possibilities.
So it's not about emptying our minds. It's about recognizing
the boundless nature of our awareness.
Awareness, yeah.
Think of space itself. No boundaries, no limits. And yet it contains everything.
Right.
Stars, planets, galaxies. In a similar way, our true nature is this limitless space of awareness.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Isn't it?
Yeah. It reminds me of that Zen saying, you cannot nail a peg into the sky.
perfect analogy.
Yeah. And it's really fascinating how Chinese Buddhism embraced this idea of the void, but also adapted it to their own cultural context.
They did. They did. They allowed monks to marry, emphasized the possibility of enlightenment for lay people.
Right. Much more approachable.
It is.
Yeah.
And that story of the layman Vimalakirti winning a debate about the void by remaining silent.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's a classic example of that pragmatic approach. It's not about intellectual gymnastics,
Yeah.
but a direct experience of reality.
It makes you wonder, if our true nature is this boundless void, then what is it that's clinging? What's the source of this resistance to change and this fear of death?
That's a question that lies at the heart of both Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, and it's something we'll continue to explore.
So if our true nature is this boundless void, what is it that's clinging, resisting change? Where does that fear of death come from?
Both Hinduism and Buddhism point to the ego, that sense of a separate self that we identify with so strongly.
Ah, the ego, that little voice in my head that's always worried about me and mine. But isn't the ego, necessary for functioning in the world?
Absolutely. It's not inherently bad. Helps us navigate daily life, interact with others.
Right.
But when we become overly identified with this limited sense of self, it creates a lot of unnecessary suffering. We start clinging to things, fearing loss, resisting change.
It's like we build a wall around ourselves trying to protect this fragile ego.
Yes.
And we end up isolating ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. The lecturer tells this story about a man who dedicated himself to all sorts of spiritual practices, trying to eliminate his ego, become completely unselfish.
Right.
But the Buddhist saw right through his efforts. He pointed out that as long as this man was trying to save his own skin, he was still trapped in the cycle of self-preservation.
So even our attempts at self-improvement can be driven by ego.
They can.
It's like we're trying to trade in our old ego for a newer, shinier model, but it's still ego underneath.
Exactly. And that's why simply trying to get rid of the ego isn't the answer.
Okay.
Both Hinduism and Buddhism offer practices and teachings aimed at kind of dissolving this illusion of a separate self. But it's not about achieving some permanent ego death.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that the ego is just one part of a much larger, more expansive reality.
It's like that whirlpool analogy again.
It is.
The whirlpool has a form, but it's not separate from the water flowing through it.
Exactly. Our individual selves are not separate from that larger flow of existence. What Hindus call Brahman. What Buddhists call Sunyata, or emptiness.
So the key is to loosen our grip on this limited sense of self and connect with something larger.
Yes.
But how do we actually do that?
Both traditions offer a variety of practices. Meditation, mindfulness, contemplation, even spending time in nature.
Okay.
All aimed at shifting our awareness from that narrow confines of the ego to this vast expanse of our true nature.
So it's about expanding our sense of self to include like the whole world.
It is. It's like that Hindu concept, Tatvam Asi, that art thou, where the separation between self and others starts to dissolve.
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is. It can lead to greater compassion, understanding, even joy. In the face of life's challenges.
It's like we're not just playing the world game, as the lecturer put it.
Right.
But realizing that we are the game.
We are the game.
Every being, every experience is like a manifestation of this
ultimate reality.
And when we recognize this interconnectedness, we can start to act with like greater wisdom and skillful means, let go of our fears and attachments, and really just live more fully in the present moment. This has been, wow, a really mind-expanding deep dive.
It has.
I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light. Less as a collection of separate things and more as this vibrant, interconnected web of being.
That's it.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for guiding us through these really complex and really fascinating ideas.
It's been my pleasure.
It's given us all, I think, a lot to ponder and a lot to practice. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Hindu philosophy and Buddhism. We hope this has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to, keep exploring these really profound traditions. Until next time, keep those minds open and curious.